Welcome back to the Home Studio Simplified channel. Today, in keeping with our Cakewalk tutorials, we're going to be covering something that I've had quite a few requests for. Today, we'll be talking about the Pro Channel. With that said, let's move on over into Cakewalk now and pull up the Pro Channel on a demo bus that I've created specifically for this tutorial. Some things to make mention of before we even get started into the actual plugins that are contained within the Pro Channel and or their respective controls. One thing that I would make mention of is that when you expand the Pro Channel in the console view, the Pro Channel always extends to the right of the channel strip, and you can expand it by clicking on this small triangle here. Contained within this slot to the right of the track with which I've just opened the Pro Channel are now all of the Pro Channel plugins that can be enabled at any given time. And yet again, for the sake of this tutorial, this is not normally what your Pro Channel would look like, as I do have every single instance of every plugin enabled on it. One more thing to make mention of that is also notable is that due to technical limitations of the VST plugin format, it is not possible to show more than one instance of a Pro Channel module. As a result, the same Pro Channel instance cannot be displayed in the inspector and console view at the same time. So, if you open up Pro Channel in the inspector, the same Pro Channel will close in the console view, and vice versa. I'll demonstrate this here. I'll move the console view to the bottom of the screen, where I can then dock it here. Now, if I have my Pro Channel open within the console view, if I was to try to open it over here in the track panel, you notice that it automatically changes the view in the console. Likewise, if I was to open it in the console view, it would close it in the track view. Now, before we start diving into each individual plugin instance, let's talk first about what the Pro Channel is. The Pro Channel features a collection of audio processing modules that can be dynamically added, removed, and reordered per audio track, instrument track, and bus in the inspector and console view. The Pro Channel combines compression, equalization, tube saturation modeling, console emulation, and tape emulation, as well as convolution reverb in one convenient processor. The Pro Channel is designed to make it fast and easy to enhance any track and or bus. Alright, let's talk a little bit about actually using the Pro Channel itself first. If you're looking at the track view, your inspector view will be just to the left by default. From here you can access the Pro Channel by clicking on this button here that says PC when it's collapsed, or Pro CH when it's expanded. To add a module, either click on the plus sign here and select one from the drop-down list, or you can right-click at the top of any of the other plugins and insert a module from here as well. From within this menu, you can also replace and remove modules as well. You'll notice there is also the option to set modules as default for buses. This feature can come in very handy if you have a set of effects and or plugins that you typically like to use on every mix. You can simply set them as default for your buses. Moving back to the console view, you can see that there is no plus symbol here to add a module this way. Therefore, you will need to right-click in an empty space and or right-click at the top of an already pre-existing module. To reorder the modules, simply click and drag on the fine lines that are found here. By default, the Pro Channel signal is routed prior to the channel's FX rack, or pre. To route the Pro Channel after the FX rack, or post, right-click any empty space in the Pro Channel and select Post FX Rack on the pop-up menu. Secondarily, you can also select that here. Another great feature found within the Pro Channel that is often overlooked is the ability to use presets. From this box here, you can either load or save your own personal presets for recall. Let's say for instance that I wanted a preset that would allow me to load every single plugin at once. I could simply click the floppy disk icon here as Save Preset and name it to something applicable. Now you'll see that the preset name has changed, and if I wanted to, I could easily load that at any given time. You'll notice too that any of the changes that you've made on EQ curves or anything of that nature actually move with the preset as well. Alright, one last thing before we start diving into the plugins themselves. If my mouse is hovering over here in this area of the channel strip, by moving my scroll wheel up and down, I'll move the entire screen. However, if my mouse is over here, I'll just move the Pro Channel itself. If at any time I feel like it's getting too cluttered, I can simply go up to Strips and narrow all strips. Alright, now for the moment that you've all been waiting for. We're going to discuss in depth each individual plugin found on the Pro Channel, what it is, what it does, and even some of the controls. Let's start first with the PC76U channel compressor. Now, you'll notice that I have this on a bus. Typically, the channel compressor, or the PC76U, would actually go on a channel and not a bus. The compressor modules let you limit the dynamic range and balance the overall level. Compression makes the loud parts of a signal quieter, resulting in a more even level. When using the Pro Channel on a track, this is the default mode. This mode is meticulously modeled after one of the most renowned and famous solid-state or FET compressors that is used in professional studios and recordings, known to bring out the brightness and presence of a sound. Commonly used on vocal tracks, but also recommended for stereo drum buses and guitar tracks. It's notable to mention that the PC76U type channel compressor, because it is faithfully modeled after the hardware circuitry of a classic compressor that does not support sidechaining, consequently, the PC76U type channel compressor does not support sidechaining either. Now, if you need to use sidechaining, we'll cover how you can do that in just a moment. The PC76U type channel compressor module contains the following controls. The clipping LED, which shows if the input signal to the compressor module is clipping. If there's any distortion in the Pro Channel signal chain, the clipping LEDs let you identify where the clipping occurs. This is the compressor enable or disable button. Contained just beneath that is a view meter that shows the amount of gain reduction that's taking place. This input knob determines the relative threshold and total amount of gain reduction. The valid range is -20 dB to +40 dB, and the default value is -0.2 dB. Now, the PC76U type channel compressor does not have a dedicated threshold control, but instead has a fixed threshold level and uses the input control to determine the relative threshold, as well as the total amount of gain reduction. To set a specific amount of compression, first turn the input and output controls all the way down. Adjust the attack control in order to engage gain reduction, and then finally, adjust the input control until the desired amount of gain reduction is achieved. Moving on next to the attack knob. The attack adjusts the time that it takes the compressor to respond to the input signal after the threshold level has been reached. A fast attack setting means that compression will be more or less instant. Using a slower attack setting results in the compression being gradually increased, allowing for more variations in the signal than the fast setting. Attack should be adjusted according to the nature of the audio material, however. The valid range is 0.0 to 1.2 milliseconds, and the default value is 0.4 milliseconds. Next, there is the release knob. Release adjusts the time that the compressor takes to go back to an inactive state after the input level has fallen below the threshold value. Short release times will make the compression more flexible and able to adapt to the input signal, but can also cause fast changes in gain that may sound displeasing to ears. Longer release times produce a signal with a more even level and less of a pumping effect, but also make it harder to maximize the overall compression because changes in the input level cannot be compensated for quickly enough to make the output volume totally consistent. The valid range for this knob is 50.0 milliseconds to 1200 milliseconds, and the default value is 510 milliseconds. Next in line is the output knob, which applies a final gain adjustment to the post-compression audio signal. The valid range is -40 dB to +20 dB, and the default value is -0.4 dB. We'll pause here to mention that the output control essentially functions as a makeup gain control, so use the input control to set the desired amount of limiting, and then use the output control to set the desired output level. Contained just below the upper 4 row of knobs is the ratio settings. Ratio controls the amount of compression or gain reduction that will be applied to the signal after the input audio level exceeds the threshold level. Ratio denotes the difference in dB between input level and output level, or, for instance, how much the signal above the threshold level will be compressed. For example, A ratio of 4:1 means that when the input level increases by 4 dBs, the output level of the signal above the threshold will only increase by 1 dB. The following ratios are available: 4:1, 8:1, 12:1, 20:1, and infinity. The settings 4 and 8 are used when general dynamic range compression is desired. 12 through 20 is used when peak limiting is desired. And the infinity button has the same effect as if all of the other ratio buttons are enabled simultaneously. The result is extreme compression, which is often used for drum recordings. Lastly, we have the dry-wet knob. The dry-wet knob adjusts the balance between the unprocessed or the dry level and the processed or the wet level of the audio signal. The valid range is 0 to 100% and the default value is 100%. With that being said, if wet is all the way at 100, every ounce of compression that's being applied to an audio track will be heard. By blending it down to 50, only 50% of that compression will be heard in the audio track. You can blend to taste. One of the Easter eggs that's found on the PC76U type compressor is this small screw right here that you can actually turn. What it does, I'm really not sure. If you know, leave a comment in the comment section below. As has already been stated, there are actually two types of compression modules that are available on the Pro channel. Because I'm on the bus, I have access to the other, which is actually the PC 4K S-type bus compressor. You'll notice the slight change and the ability now to add side chaining. This particular compressor is modeled after a legendary center console stereo bus compressor in one of the world's most successful analog studio production mixing consoles. It's known to add punch and drive to a mix, and also recommended for instruments like pianos and drums. The major thing that sets this apart from the other compressor is the fact that this allows for side chaining. Much like the other compressor, this one contains the clipping LED, the enable and bypass button, as well as the view meter. Some subtle changes are introduced when we come down to the next row of 4 knobs. As you'll see now, there's a makeup gain knob that's been added. The threshold, attack, and release work much like they did on the previous compressor. Now the makeup knob in this case compensates or makes up for automatic gain reduction. Makeup gain refers to the process of rebalancing the subjective level of the compressed audio against the uncompressed audio. In other words, makeup gain reduces the difference in level between the loudest and quietest sounds of the processed audio. As the compressor turns down the peak levels of the audio that exceeds the threshold level, you may want to turn up the level of the entire compressor to balance the mix. For example, if you increase the gain so that the peak levels are the same as before compression, the quieter sections of the audio will also be increased by the same amount, effectively keeping the peak levels as they were before compression while increasing the level of the quieter audio. The valid range is -10 dBs to +30 dBs and auto, and the default value is 0 dBs. If auto is selected, the makeup gain is automatically calculated based on the ratio and threshold settings. You can set the makeup gain knob to auto by simply turning it all the way up. Moving down to the next row, we also have some more not-so-subtle changes. For instance, the introduction of an HPF knob. The HPF knob is a sidechain high-pass filter. Sidechaining is typically used with compressors to limit one signal depending on the signal level of another. Common applications are to reduce the level of a bass guitar when there is a kick drum, or to reduce the level of music whenever a speaker talks, often for background music in radio and television programs. Audio tracks, buses, and send outputs can be routed to sidechain inputs. The sidechain section contains the following controls. This small switch here will enable or disable the sidechain's ability. The high-pass knob applies a high-pass filter to the sidechain input. The valid range is off to 2 kHz. Moving on now to the ratios, the subtle changes that take place here are the lack of ratio settings. On this particular compressor, you have 2, 4, and 10. 2 and 4 being used for general dynamic range compression, and 10 being used for peak limiting. Lastly, you have the ever so useful dry-wet knob. While in our inspector view, the Quadcurve equalizer module can be displayed in either full size or compact size. The compact module hides the frequency, Q, and level controls for the low, low-mid, mid-high, and high bands. You may want to show the compact size if Pro Channel is too tall to show all of its controls in the inspector or the console view. To show or hide the compact mode in the inspector, simply click on the display button located here. Next, go to Module Options and then Pro Channel. Then select Compact EQ Module. To do the same in the console view, simply go up to Options, Pro Channel, and Compact EQ Module here. For now, we're going to leave the EQ full size. Alright, now let's dive into some of the controls that are found within the EQ module itself. Just like the other modules, we have a clipping LED and an enable and disable switch here. The section just below that contains our EQ curve styles. Each style provides a different interaction between the Q and level settings. The styles are as follows. Hybrid. The hybrid style provides an unsymmetrical curve that is very versatile. The curve is similar to E-type when boosting frequencies, but has a constant Q response when cutting frequencies. This is suitable for gentle fill EQ when boosting, while also accurately modifying troublesome resonance frequencies when cutting. This type of style might be recommended for drum or percussion instruments, also for problem solving and surgical correction of frequencies. The next style to the right is the pure style. This provides a clean and transparent mastering style equalizer with a soft and gentle curve. This would definitely be applicable for just overall EQ, buses, mastering, or whenever you need to apply subtle changes over a wide spectrum. Next on the right is the E-type. This provides a curve that mimics a vintage hardware equalizer. In this mode, the Q response is constant at all level settings. This allows you to have a narrow Q at low gain settings, which is especially useful for drums. The mode is less suitable for overall EQ or subtle corrections, because you also need to adjust the Q settings to maintain its effect when adjusting the gain. This is a very clinical and flexible EQ because it has separate control over Q and level. Some great applications for this particular style are drums, precision and problem solving, and whenever you need relatively high Q at low gain settings. Lastly, we have the G-type. This provides a curve that mimics a modern hardware equalizer. In this mode, the Q response is dynamic, meaning the Q is reduced as you increase the level, and the effective bandwidth is increased for low gain settings. This is a musical EQ with a gentle Q curve. Some great applications for this particular style are overall EQ, subtle adjustments of instruments and vocals, and just broad and musical tonal balancing. Located just below that is the graph. The graph shows the equalization curve. Each band is identified by a unique color, and the sum of all bands is displayed as a white line. Adjust the equalizer by manipulating the graph, or likewise by turning the knobs. To adjust a band's gain, simply drag it up or down. To adjust the band's frequency, left and right. To adjust the band's Q, hold down the Alt key and drag the band up or down. To adjust the parameters with finer precision, hold down the Shift key while dragging. This is with the Shift key enabled. You'll notice I can make fine-tune adjustments. If I release the Shift key, it moves very fast now. To enable or disable a band, click the band's region in the graph, or simply click the button located here. You can also change the plot resolution globally. Simply go up to Options, EQ and Plot, and set the desired resolution here. Our top row of knobs is your frequency. From here you can set the center frequency for the selected band. The valid frequency range for each band is 20 Hz to 20,000 kHz, with a default center frequency that comes up automatically. The next section is the Q. This sets the width of the selected band, which determines the amount of surrounding frequencies that will be affected when adjusting the band. A low Q gives you a high bandwidth for the filter band, resulting in a smooth shaping of sound and little audible coloration. Filtering will, however, be less accurate, since a wide frequency range around the center frequency will be affected. A high Q value reduces the bandwidth, improving the filter accuracy, but also creates sharp dips or peaks in the frequency spectrum. The width of the Q is expressed in terms of octaves. The valid range is 0.1 to 16.0, and the default value is 1.3. The next row of knobs just under that are your levels. These will boost or attenuate the selected bands. The valid range is -18 dBs to +18 dBs, and the default value is 0 dBs. The level control interacts with the Q perimeter, that is, depending on the selected EQ type. Just below those four knobs we have two switches which indicate our filter types for the low band and the high band. With low shelf enabled, when I boost, I'll be boosting a shelf. With the bell enabled, it will be in a bell shape. Likewise, on the high band, if shelf is enabled, I'll be boosting as a shelf. And with bell enabled, I'll be boosting as a bell type frequency curve. And just below that, we have our slope knobs. The slope knob on the left adjusts the slope for the high pass filter. The slope knob on the right adjusts the slope for the low pass filter. Enabling the high pass filter will attenuate low frequencies below the high pass frequency, while other frequencies will be allowed to pass unfiltered. Likewise, enabling the low pass filter will attenuate high frequencies above the low pass frequency, while allowing other frequencies to pass unfiltered. Now that these are enabled, I can set my slope to whatever I would desire. The high pass slope specifies the ratio of how the high pass filter attenuates frequencies below the high pass frequency. The slope is expressed in decibels per octave, and the range is from 6 dBs to 48 dBs in 6 dB increments. Lastly, the gloss button adds a smooth breath and presence to the high end without any harshness using a unique gloss filter. Now let's go more in depth to the flyout menu. To open the flyout menu, you can do one of the following. In the Pro channel, click the Quadcurve Equalizer module's zoom button, which looks like this. You can also double-click any blank space in the small Pro Channel EQ curve display. Now that we have it open, we can either close it here or here. In order to keep the flyout panel open, simply tick the small pin button here. This will pin the window out so that it will not close on you. The flyout panel will remain open now until either of the following happens. The track focus changes, or other major user interface changes occur, such as floating the inspector, or any other change that causes the parent Pro Channel module to be closed. Now that we have the flyout panel open, let's look at some of the controls found within the flyout panel. This meter over here indicates your input meter. This is where the EQ plot and the FFT spectrum analyzer is located, as seen on your screen now, with the piano track that's playing in the background. This here is your output meter. As I already spoke of, this is the pin and unpin. This is the enable and bypass. Apart from the input and output controls, all of the other controls found on the bottom of the screen are exactly identical to what they would be if the pop-out menu was not enabled. One last thing to make mention of about the EQs that is also little known is the fact that you can actually copy and paste EQ curves from within these windows. If I was to hold Control, I could click and drag this EQ plot curve here. The next module we'll look at is tube saturation. Digital audio recordings can sometimes sound sterile and lifeless. The tube saturation module employs advanced analog vacuum tube circuit modeling, which allows you to apply ultra high quality analog warmth and saturation to individual tracks and full mixes. Under the hood are dynamic virtual vacuum tubes that mimic the animated nature of their real analog counterpart as they respond to different audio input. The result is the coveted warm, lively, and realistic analog sound of classic vacuum tube processors and amplifiers. The controls are as follows: the clipping LED, the enable or bypass button, input, drive, output, and then lastly, the type. Your input gain applies a gain adjustment to the pre-processed audio signal. Like most other things within Cakewalk by Bandlab, you can hold down the Shift key to adjust the control with a finer resolution. The drive adjusts how much of the pre-processed input signal enters into saturation. The valid range is 0%, where no saturation is taking place, to 100%, which is very saturated, and the default setting is 0, Lastly, your output gain applies a final gain adjustment to the post-processed audio signal. The small tube saturation icon located here will actually glow to show any tube saturation activity. When the input signal is being processed, the icon will glow. The small switch located just underneath the icon will change it from type 1 to type 2. Type 1 provides pure tube emulation, whereas type 2 is a dual tube emulation. The second tube applies a special crossover filter in the high end and doesn't process high frequencies. This ensures that sibilant sounds are not distorted or sound metallic. The result is a gentler tube saturation in the higher frequencies. The console emulation plugin, whether it be for the channel or for the bus, has been covered in depth in another video, which you'll see in the upper right hand corner of your screen now. If you'd like to know more in depth about the console emulators, I would definitely recommend going and checking out that video. Moving on to the Softube saturation knob. The Softube saturation knob module borrows from Softube's famous German FET distortion and compression circuitry modeling and provides smooth one-knob frequency saturation operation for adding just the right amount of tube warmth to any track. The controls are as follows: clipping LED, the enable or bypass switch, the saturation knob itself. This LED will light up and indicate when the saturation is taking place. You also have an about box, and you have a switch to select between 3 different types of saturation. The types are as follows: keep high, neutral, and keep low. With the keep high setting enabled, it does not distort the highest frequencies. On vocals, this usually gives a brighter or harsher vocal sound. With the setting at neutral, it treats all frequencies equally. And lastly, with the setting at keep low, this prevents the bass from distorting too much. This mode is recommended for drum tracks if you want to squash a drum loop, but prevent the loss of low end from the bass drum, or for retaining more low end on vocal tracks. Next on the list is the FX Chain module. This lets you save and load audio effect plugin chain presets called FX Chains. The FX Chain module can be used as an FX rack that can be inserted between other Pro Channel modules. In essence, an effects chain is a container that can include multiple audio plugins, assignable knobs, and buttons that can control automatable plugin parameters in the effects chain. An effects chain preset can store up to 6 assignable knobs and 6 assignable buttons. The controls are as follows: the clipping LED, the effects chain enable and disable, the effects chain name, the input level, the show controls page, and the show effects page. These various buttons and knobs contained within the middle are all assignable. As you can see, I have 3 selected here, and I have an opening for 3 more. These can be renamed to whatever I would like, repositioned, and I can even set the start and end to a different parameter than what's already included. By clicking this drop-down box, I can send it to whatever destination I would like, thus building my FX chain. The FX chain preset name can be changed by double-clicking here. The control page shows the automatable effect parameters that are assigned to the FX chain knobs and buttons, whereas the effects page shows a list of all of the plugins that are included in the current FX chain preset. The signal flows from top to bottom, so you can drag to reorder plugins and right-click to add or remove plugins. You can even bypass individual plugins by clicking the small bypass toggle to the left of the plugin name. Everything within the FX chain is completely customizable, from the knobs that you can name, to the buttons that you can name, even to the user interface, which you can include your own background images. By right-clicking anywhere on the effects chain module, you can also save your current chain preset, or even load one that you've already got. It's notable to mention that the fader cap, button image, and rotary image settings cannot be customized from the FX chain module. If you do desire to customize the aforementioned, simply create the FX chain preset in a track's FX rack, and then load the FX chain preset into the Pro Channel from there. The next module we'll talk about is Breverb. The Breverb by Overloud provides a world-class studio reverb. Dozens of professional presets are included, and Cakewalk by Bandlab includes both VST and Pro Channel versions of Breverb, with all of the controls found on this particular plugin being very similar to other reverb-type plugins. I won't go into too much depth on this particular plugin itself. We'll move on now to the Tape Emulator. The Tape Emulator module by Overloud lets you add the warmth and richness of analog magnetic tape saturation to your digital mixes. The Tape Emulator module emulates the sonic characteristics of analog tape recordings and provides extensive control with adjustable tape speed, bias, and noise parameters. Digital audio is often accused of lacking character, and although mixing entirely inside a computer has many benefits, it can sometimes lack the character of using an analog mixing console and analog magnetic tape. Digital audio can capture audio levels up to 0 dB before undesirable clipping occurs. This is known as overload. Analog tape recordings also have an upper limit. However, unlike digital clipping, the signal compresses and distorts slightly as you approach that limit. There's typically a sweet spot of a few decibels before undesirable distortion occurs. Because tape saturation sounds pleasing to most people, recording engineers have long been using it as a creative mixing tool. Unlike real analog tape, the Tape Emulator gives you the flexibility of applying tape saturation to individual tracks and only where desired. For example, you may want to apply heavy tape saturation to drums, a little less to bass guitar, but not to vocals, etc. So what exactly is tape saturation? Well, tape saturation occurs when you try to record too loud and varying signal levels onto magnetic tape for it to accurately reproduce, whereby the input signal is no longer directly proportional to the recorded signal. So during the playback, the tape reproduces less energy than was originally there, which is the saturation effect. Recording engineers often experience this as a result of trying to record a signal that is loud enough to overcome ever-present tape hiss. Unlike digital distortion, analog tape saturation can sound pleasing in the right situations, especially on drums. Tape saturation adds subtle non-linear distortion, compression, and EQ, which can add grittiness and bottom end to your tracks. This is often perceived as punch and/or warmth. The Tape Emulator model contains the following controls: the clipping LED, the Tape Emulator enable and disable button, the noise, which adjusts the level of simulated tape hiss, the record level, which applies a gain adjustment to the pre-processed audio signal or the input level, where higher values can cause increased compression and saturation. To the right of that, the playback level, which applies a final gain adjustment to the post-processed audio signal or the output level. Tape speed adjusts the simulated tape speed, which impacts the compression behavior. There are two settings. 7.5 represents a slow tape speed, which has a more compressed and warm tone, lacking of high frequencies. 15 represents a standard tape speed and causes faster compression and attack times. To the right of that is the bias switch. Magnetic tape has a nonlinear response at low signal strengths. Therefore, tape bias is designed to improve the fidelity of those low signal analog magnetic tape sound recordings by pushing the signal into the linear zone of the tape's transfer function. This results in less low and mid frequency harmonic distortions. There are two settings found here: over and normal. Over reduces distortion in the low and mid frequency range, particularly on sibilant sounds, and interacts with the noise level. Normal represents a standard level of distortion. When link is enabled, the recording level and playback level knobs are linked to help to maintain unity gain. When disabled, the recording level and playback level knobs can be operated independently. Next on the list is the ReMatrix Solo. The ReMatrix Solo module by Overloud is a world-class convolution reverb that includes 100 impulse responses, or IRSs, designed by Morvox. You can also import your own IRs and control the EQ, length, delay, and stereo field of any single IR. ReMatrix combines the high fidelity of a convolution reverb with the flexibility of an algorithmic reverb. The included presets were created in real mixing sessions and are ready to use for music production. The controls are as follows: the clipping LED, the enable and bypass button, Just below that, we have our preset, which shows the selected preset name. Click to select another preset, or use the left and right arrow buttons to scroll through the available presets. Just below that is the IR display. This shows the name and waveform of the selected IR, or impulse response. Internal IRs are grouped by type, and the selected IR name is prefixed with a letter that indicates its type. As you can see, this has an H, which stands for Hall. The R stands for room. The P stands for plate. The E stands for early reflections. And the S stands for special. If you were to load your own IR, it would show up under U as user. The three knobs just below the IR display are time, delay, and stereo. Time sets the overall duration of the reverb. Delay adds a pre-delay before the initial processing of the IR takes place. This control allows you to adjust the response time of the IR, and stereo does just what it says, adjust the stereo width. The three knobs located just below that are EQ gain, EQ frequency, and EQ Q. The first knob adjusts the EQ gain of the processed signal. The EQ frequency sets the center frequency of the EQ, and the Q knob sets the width of the EQ's center frequency, which determines the amount of surrounding frequencies that will be affected when adjusting the EQ. The width of the Q is expressed in terms of octaves. At the minimum value, the EQ functions as a high shelf filter. At the maximum value, the EQ functions as a low pass filter. Just below that is a dry and wet slider, which adjusts the balance between the unprocessed or the dry and the processed or the wet signal. Located at the end of the slider is another bypass button, which temporarily bypasses the ReMatrix Solo module. Lastly, you can click this icon here to show the About box. The next module we're going to cover is the Bark of Dog. The Bark of Dog Pro Channel module by Boz Digital Labs is a high-pass filter with a resonance that can add lots of energy to the low end of a track. It lets you boost the low end while keeping it under control. Well known for creating the famous Voice of God vocal effect, hence the tongue-in-cheek name Bark of Dog, Bark of Dog is also great for tuning bass or kick drums to make them stand out in a mix. Although most digital equalizers have a resonant high-pass filter, Bark of Dog's intuitive controls make it fast and easy to get the desired result without thinning the sound. I would suggest using the Bark of Dog to make voice, bass, kick, piano, and more come alive with a deep and clear low end. The Bark of Dog contains the following controls: the clipping LED, the enable and disable button, amplitude, which adjusts the resonant frequency level, turn it up for more resonant boost and down for less. The valid range is -6 dBs to 20 dBs, and the default is set to 1 dB. The frequency knob controls the high-pass filter frequency and thus where the resonance occurs. The valid range is 20 Hz to 2000 kHz, and the default value is 79 Hz. The mix knob adjusts the blend of emphasis compared to the dry signal. The valid range is 0% to 100%, and the default value is 100%. To the right of that, we have an input and an output meter, which displays the pre-processing signal level going into Bark of Dog and the post-processing signal level going out. Just to the right of that, the trim adjusts the overall output level. The valid range is -36 dBs to +36 dBs, and the default value is set to 0. And next on the list, the Panipulator. The Panipulator Pro Channel module by Boz Digital Labs lets you simulate how your stereo mixes will translate to a variety of stereo and mono configurations. You can use this to check the mono compatibility of your mixes and identify various problems in the stereo field that are not always obvious when listening to proper stereo monitors. So, in theory, you can hear what your mixes will sound like in less than ideal environments, such as when a stereo mix is summed to mono. Simply flip the mono toggle switch between mono and stereo. Use the large knob to select the desired mono mode. Or maybe only one channel is audible due to incorrect wiring or a damaged speaker. You can move the knob to left or right only to listen to only the left or right channels. Maybe even one of the speakers is wired backwards. You can flip the L polarity or R polarity toggle to flip the polarity of the left and right channels. This makes Panipulator not only useful as a troubleshooting tool, but can also be used for creative mixing purposes and to correct recording mistakes. For instance, when starting a new mix or while tracking, start by monitoring in mono. This makes it easier to identify where frequencies clash and allow you to address the problem with EQ and/or compressors, or re-recording with different sounds before applying painting. Simply flip the mono toggle in the Panipulator to mix in mono, then flip it back when you're ready to pan in stereo. Another instance is if you accidentally recorded a stereo track with the polarity flipped, or if the microphones were out of phase. The L polarity or right polarity toggles can help. This is a common issue with drum overheads. You can also swap the panning of stereo effects. For example, stereo reverb and delay plugins normally maintain the panning of the track or the bus that you send to them. If the instrument track is panned hard left, the reverb or the delay also will be panned hard left. So use Panipulator's flip LR toggle to send the reverb or the delay to the other side. Keeping the dry track on one side and the effects on the other can result in interesting mixing possibilities. The Panipulator module contains the following controls: the clipping LED, the enable and bypass button, the flip LR, which swaps the left and right channels, the L polarity, which inverts the polarity or the phase of the left channel, likewise the R polarity, which inverts the polarity or the phase of the right channel, mono sums the stereo signal to mono, and from the knob to the right you can select various mono modes. As a side note, the Panipulator uses very little CPU resources and is very effective in pointing out problems in a stereo mix, so add Panipulator to the master bus on all your mixes. This allows you to instantly verify how your mix translates to different systems. Lastly, we're going to cover really briefly the style dial effects. The style dial effects are powerful audio processing modules with a simple user interface. Each style dial effects module features only a single knob that lets you dial in the desired effect. The knob range goes from subtle to fully processed. Cakewalk by Bandlab includes the following style dial effects: grit or saturation. The grit module provides smooth frequency saturation operation for adding just the right amount of tube warmth to any track, dialing anything from warm tube sound to more of a modern amp overdrive. Next there is max, which is a volume maximizer. The max module is a one-knob volume maximizer that transparently increases the overall sound loudness of a track or bus by reducing the dynamic range. Use max as a convenient track leveler and compressor. The space module adds reverb or ambience to an audio signal. You can simulate environments from small rooms to huge halls. The space gets increasingly larger as you increase the knob value. The smoother module is designed for vocals and guitars and helps remove sibilants or harsh frequencies without losing presence. The gator module is a simple noise gate for removing unwanted noise in a track. The depth module adds a lot of space and makes the sound feel wider and bigger. This can be used as a chorus or for stereo shaping. The pulse module, or a tremolo type module, adds an auto volume swelling effect, and at higher settings can get a bit of saturation and modulation as well. And lastly, the shaper or the transient control. The shaper module lets you shape the audio signal's attack phase independently of the decay or the sustain phase. I hope this deep dive into the Pro Channel modules that are contained within Cakewalk by Bandlab has proved useful. Remember, if there's anything that was not covered, please leave it in the comment section down below. Also located below is a link to the Cakewalk by Bandlab training course, which includes all of the videos that are in this playlist. By purchasing the training course once, all of the videos that are currently in the YouTube playlist and those that will be added in the future will be yours. You can download them at your own leisure and watch them on your own time. I'd really consider that you do this, as it will help to support this channel and all of the hard work that I'm putting in to making these free tutorials. Until next time guys, I'll see you later.